So I chose question prompt 2, the major differences between creeping and crawling. And what we see first is crawling, and the age range of that is usually between 7 to 8 months, but it does depend on the child and their environment. And some of the characteristics for this stage of development is that in the beginning we see that crawling is referred to as belly crawling, and this is where the child displays minimal elevation of the trunk or torso region from the surface. And during belly crawling, the child's movement is minimal and consists of thrusting their arms, which will lead to a slight forward progression. And the infant's legs are not involved very much during belly crawling, but will play a significantly larger role in later stages of crawling that will lead to more advanced methods of prone locomotion. And backwards crawling is observed also, and that's after the initial attempts of crawling by the child are established. So it's caused by the flexion of the legs upward by the child that will lead to counterproductive backwards motion instead of forward progress. And this form of crawling is only temporary though, and like I said before, we see the incorporation of the infant's legs, and although this form is not efficient or effective, it does lead to later development of the legs in crawling, and it becomes essential and effective to the later progression. What this efficient motion looks like though is where the child flexes their legs and re-extends them to propel themselves forward. And this motion is repeated as fast and vigorous attempts that lead to move themselves short and abrupt distances. Skipping stages throughout the development of crawling is normal, and the child oftentimes would still go through a pattern of motions that would progress their crawling skills. So after crawling is where we see creeping, and this begins around 9 to 12 months after initial crawling is established. And the largest observable difference between crawling and creeping is that in creeping, the infants begin to gradually elevate their body from the ground. So as their ability to elevate themselves increases, their legs can progressively begin to support themselves by being flexed into a position beneath their body, so that all fours position, and where we can establish the more clear picture of crawling, like I said. So crawling can be defined as a less sophisticated version of movement in comparison to creeping. And so crawling can be described as the dragging or sliding of the body versus creeping, which is the elevated version, which incorporates more limbs to aid in more efficient movement. And in early stages of creeping, the child's movements are not fluid and will move one limb at a time, which means slower and less efficient progression. So eventually the child develops a contralateral, lateral, or homolateral creeping pattern. And homolateral patterns are defined by the use of limbs on the same side of the body simultaneously moving forward or backwards, so the right arm moving with the right leg. Most children are shown to creep contralaterally though, which is where the limbs oppose each other. So the right leg moves forward while the right arm moves back. Efficient form of creeping may be observed around 9 months of age, but most children have shown to perfect their skills until around 2 years of age. And that pretty much sums up the differences between crawling and creeping. Again, creeping, it comes after crawling and is essentially the more typical version of crawling that I personally thought of before, where we see the child on all fours rather than actual crawling, which is more of a torso sliding motion, an attempt to go elevate themselves. But I would say that creeping is definitely the version of crawling that I thought for a while.